Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. Location: Voyageurs National Park, Minnesota. Date: October 27, 2009. The fog came off Kabetogama Lake like something breathing, slow and deliberate, curling between the black spruce and paper birch that crowded the shoreline. Nathan Erickson stood on the dock behind the Ash River Visitor Center, coffee thermos warming his hands, watching the mist erase the world in layers. First, the far shore vanished, then the small islands, then the water itself, until he could see nothing beyond 20 feet of gray wooden planking and the vague suggestion of his patrol boat rocking gently in the unseen current. The air smelled of decomposing leaves, cold water, and something else. That particular mineral sharpness that meant temperatures would drop hard tonight. He'd worked Voyageurs for 6 years now, and his body had learned to read the land the way some people read expressions. This morning, the land was holding its breath. October in the park meant solitude. The summer crowds were 3 months gone. The fall-color tourists had packed up 2 weeks ago, and now the skeleton crew remained. Himself, District Ranger Patricia Holm, at the Rainy Lake Station 40 miles north, and old Frank Beaulieu, who ran the Namakan outpost near the Canadian border. 3 rangers for 18,000 acres of water and wilderness. The park wouldn't officially close until November 15th, but they might see 2 or 3 visitors between now and then. Maybe none. Nathan finished his coffee and headed back inside to complete the morning equipment check. The visitor center was a modest building, all honey-colored pine and large windows that looked out on nothing but fog this morning. He verified the emergency medical kit was stocked, tested both handheld radios and found them clear, checked the satellite phone battery, and logged everything in the daily operations journal. His handwriting was neat, precise, a habit from his Army days that had never faded. 715 hours. Fog advisory. Visibility, 100 feet. Lake patrol postponed until conditions improve. He initialed the entry and set the journal aside. The radio crackled to life. Ash River, this is Rainy Lake, morning check. Nathan keyed the response. Rainy Lake, Ash River copies, all quiet here. Fog's thick as soup, I'm grounded until it lifts. Patricia's voice came back warm with static. Same up here. Supposed to clear by noon, then we've got that cold front coming through tonight. You winterized the boat yet? Doing it this week. Don't wait too long. Ice comes fast up here. Rainy Lake out. The radio went silent, and the fog pressed against the windows like something wanting in. By mid-morning, the fog had thinned enough that Nathan could see the parking lot from his office window. That's when he noticed the car, a silver Honda Civic with Wisconsin plates, parked in the far corner near the trailhead. He hadn't heard it arrive. The fog must have swallowed the engine sound completely. He pulled on his jacket and walked out to investigate. The car was cold to the touch, which meant it had been there at least an hour, probably longer. Through the window he could see a day pack on the passenger seat, a water bottle in the cup holder, and a folded map with yellow highlighter marks tracing the Blind Ash Bay Trail. On the dashboard, a handwritten note. Starting at 6 a.m., should be back by noon. Don't worry. A. Nathan checked the trailhead registry. The last entry was timed at 5:47 a.m. Allison Marsh, age 28, Madison, WI, solo hiker. Intended destination, Blind Ash Bay Overlook, 4.2-mile loop. Expected return, 12 Oz p.m. He checked his watch. 10:23 a.m. Still within her window. But something about the empty car bothered him, some instinct he couldn't name. The fog was lifting, yes, but it was lifting wrong. Usually it burned off evenly as the sun warmed the water. Today it seemed to be pulling back in patches, retreating into the trees rather than dissolving, leaving pockets of opacity scattered through the forest like held breath. Nathan told himself he was being paranoid. 6 years in the backcountry teaches you to trust your gut, but it also teaches you that your gut is wrong 9 times out of 10. He went back inside, made a second pot of coffee, and decided he'd check the trailhead again at noon. If she wasn't back by then, he'd hike in after her. At 11:15 a.m., the fog was gone from the lake but still thick in the forest. Nathan could see it from the dock, a wall of gray beginning exactly where the trees began, as if the mist had decided that was its territory and the water was his. He'd never seen fog behave quite like that. Probably just a temperature differential between the lake surface and the forest floor. Probably. The birds had stopped singing. He noticed it suddenly, the way you notice a sound only when it stops. No chickadees, no woodpeckers, no ravens. The silence was so complete he could hear his own heartbeat. Unit 7, Ash River radio check. His voice sounded strange in the quiet, too loud, an intrusion, static. Then Patricia's voice, faint. River, copy, breaking up. Rainy Lake, I'm getting interference. Can you boost your signal? Hear you. Signals, something with the transmission dissolved into white noise. Nathan adjusted frequencies, tried the backup channel, got nothing but static that sounded almost like breathing. A slow rhythmic hiss that rose and fell with an organic cadence. He checked his watch. 11:47 a.m. Allison Marsh should be walking out of those woods in 13 minutes. Nathan stared at the trailhead, at the fog that refused to leave the trees, and made a decision. He grabbed his pack, his radio, his flashlight, and headed for the trail. 3 hours earlier, Allison had watched the sunrise from the Blind Ash Bay overlook and thought she'd never seen anything so beautiful. The fog lay below her like a silver ocean, the tops of pine trees poking through like dark islands, and above it all the sky burned orange and pink with the coming dawn. She'd driven 11 hours from Madison for this moment, for this silence, this solitude, this feeling of being the only person alive in a world made new. She was an experienced hiker, 3 years of solo trips through the Northwoods, proper gear, proper training, a spot beacon in her pack that could summon rescue anywhere on Earth. She'd done her research on voyageurs, knew the trails, knew the risks. The overlook was exactly where the map said it would be. The trail had been well marked and easy to follow, so she couldn't explain why, on the way back down, she found herself standing in a section of forest she didn't recognize. The trail was there, she was sure of that. She could see the brown wooden posts with the yellow blazes stretching ahead through the birch trees exactly as they should. But the trees themselves were wrong, too dense, too uniform. And the fog, which should have been burning off by now, was thicker here than it had been at dawn, pressing close around her like walls slowly contracting. Allison stopped, consulted her map. According to the trail markers, she was exactly where she should be, about 3 miles from the trailhead, 45 minutes from her car. But she'd been walking for over an hour since leaving the overlook, and the overlook was only 2.1 miles from the start. The math didn't work. "Okay," she said aloud, because the silence was starting to bother her. "You got turned around somewhere. It happens. Just keep following the blazes." She walked. The fog walked with her, maintaining its distance, never closer than 10 feet, never farther than 20. A gray perimeter that moved as she moved, stopped as she stopped. The trail markers continued to appear at regular intervals, but Allison began to notice something wrong with them. The blazes were the right color, the right shape, painted on the right kind of wooden post. But the posts were too new. No weathering, no lichen, no evidence they'd stood through even one Minnesota winter. And they were placed at wrong angles, not facing the direction of travel, but facing inward, toward her, as if they weren't marking a trail at all but watching her pass. The spot beacon was in her pack. One button press and rescue services would have her GPS coordinates within minutes. But she wasn't lost, not really. She was on the trail. She could see the markers. She just needed to keep walking, and eventually she'd reach the parking lot, and she'd laugh about this over beers back in Madison. The time I got spooked in the fog and almost hit the panic button like an idiot. That's when she heard the voice. "Allison." She froze. The voice had come from somewhere ahead, in the fog. A man's voice, calm and ordinary, as if calling to a friend across a parking lot. "Hello?" Her own voice sounded thin. "Who's there?" Silence. The fog shifted, and for a moment Allison thought she saw a shape. Tall, thin, standing motionless between two birch trees about 30 yards ahead. Then the fog closed again and there was nothing. Allison. The same voice, same tone. But this time it came from behind her. She spun. The trail stretched back into gray emptiness. No one there. But the trail posts were closer now, she was certain of it. They'd been 10 feet apart before. Now they were maybe 6. And they were all facing her. Every single one. Their yellow blazes like eyes in the mist. The spot beacon. She needed the spot beacon. Her hands shook as she unzipped her pack, dug through the contents, found the familiar weight of the device. She pressed the emergency button. The confirmation light blinked once, twice, 3 times. Signal sent. Help would come. All she had to do was wait. Allison. The voice was closer now, coming from everywhere and nowhere, and it wasn't quite right anymore. The cadence was wrong. The vowels stretched too long, as if something were learning to speak by copying sounds it didn't understand. "Allison, don't worry." Those last 2 words, from her note on the dashboard, from the message she'd written to herself that morning. Something was reading her. Something was learning her. Allison ran. Nathan found her pack at 12:34 p.m., about 1.5 miles up the Blind Ash Bay Trail. It was sitting in the middle of the path, upright and neatly positioned, as if someone had set it down carefully and walked away. The main compartment was open, contents undisturbed. Water, granola bars, rain jacket, first aid kit. Her wallet was in the side pocket, driver's license confirming what he already knew. Allison Marsh, 28, Madison. The photo showed a woman with dark hair and a confident smile, the kind of face that expected good things from the world. The spot beacon was missing. Nathan keyed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 7. I have a situation at Blind Ash Bay Trail, approximately mile marker 1.5. Found abandoned pack belonging to missing hiker Allison Marsh, female 28. Pack appears deliberately placed. Requesting immediate..." The radio screamed, not static, a sound, high and continuous like metal scraping metal or wind through a crack in something that should be sealed, or a voice stretched past the point of breaking. Nathan yanked the radio away from his ear, heart hammering, and the sound stopped as suddenly as it began. Silence. That horrible, complete silence. Then through the speaker, a voice. Patricia's voice, but wrong. "Nathan, don't worry." The same 2 words, the same cadence, and underneath it, barely audible, a sound like breathing, or like something very large, very patient, trying to remember how breathing worked. Nathan turned off the radio. The fog was closer now, he realized. When he'd found the pack, he could see 20 yards in either direction. Now the visibility had shrunk to 10, maybe less. And the trees were wrong. Too many birches, packed too close together, their white bark like bone in the gray light. He'd hiked this trail dozens of times. There shouldn't be birches here. This section passed through old-growth spruce, dark and widely spaced. He was standing in a forest that didn't exist. "Allison." His shout vanished into the fog without echo. "Allison Marsh, National Park Service. Can you hear me?" Nothing. Then, a shape moved in the fog ahead. Tall, thin, walking toward him with a gait that was almost human but not quite, the legs bending at angles that made his eyes hurt to follow. Nathan drew his sidearm. "Stop right there. Identify yourself." The shape stopped. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then, slowly, it raised one arm, an arm too long with too many joints, and pointed past Nathan, toward something behind him. He didn't turn. He knew better than to turn. Whatever was back there wanted him to look, wanted his attention divided, wanted... Nathan. The voice came from behind him, close enough to touch, and it was Allison's voice. He knew without knowing how he knew. But there was something else layered beneath it, something old and hungry and patient, and it was speaking with her throat, using her breath, wearing her words like a mask. "I found the trail. Come see." Nathan ran. He ran without thinking, crashing through birches that shouldn't exist toward spruce trees he could barely see, and the fog ran with him, and all around him in the gray, he could hear footsteps. Dozens of footsteps, hundreds, keeping perfect pace, never falling behind, never rushing ahead, just following with that terrible patience of something that knows its prey cannot run forever. He burst out of the tree line and nearly fell into the lake. The dock was there. The visitor center was there. The fog stopped at the tree line as if it had hit a wall, churning and roiling but not crossing. Not yet. Nathan stood in the parking lot gasping, his sidearm still drawn, watching the mist pulse between the trees like something alive and frustrated. Allison's car was gone. He hadn't heard it leave. There was no one else in the park who could have driven it away, but the space where it had been was empty, and on the ground where the driver's door would have been, he found a single sheet of paper, the note from her dashboard, the one that said, "Don't worry." The handwriting had changed. The words were the same, but the letters were wrong now, stretched and angular, written by something that had seen human writing but didn't understand what made it human. At the bottom, in that same alien hand, 3 new words had been added. "I remember you." The search operation found nothing. 47 personnel, tracking dogs, helicopter surveys, divers in Kabetogama Lake, nothing. No body, no trace of Allison Marsh after the abandoned pack on the trail. The spot beacon had activated at 11:23 a.m. The GPS coordinates pointed to a location 2.3 miles into the backcountry, in a section of old-growth forest. When rescuers reached the coordinates, they found only birch trees, a dense grove of paper birch that shouldn't have been there, that wasn't there on any survey, that the oldest rangers swore hadn't existed before that day. The grove is still there. It's grown every year since. Nathan Erickson requested a transfer 3 weeks after the incident. He was denied. Budget cuts, staffing shortages, the usual bureaucratic indifference. He still works at Voyageurs, still runs patrols, still watches the fog come off the lake in the early mornings and wonders what's watching back. He doesn't hike the blind Ash Bay Trail anymore. No one does, not since a volunteer from the Minnesota Conservation Corps came back from a maintenance survey pale and shaking, refusing to say what he'd seen except that there were too many trail markers. There were too many. And they were all facing the wrong way. And there was something standing in the birches that knew his name. The official report lists Allison Marsh as missing, presumed drowned. The file is closed, but sometimes late at night when the wind comes down from Canada and the temperature drops hard and fast, Nathan hears his radio crackle to life. Static first, then breathing, then a voice. Allison's voice, Patricia's voice, old Frank Beaulieu's voice, his own voice, saying the same 3 words over and over, patient and hungry and eternal. "I remember you." He's learned not to answer. He knows it's waiting for him to answer. Some nights he almost wants to. That's what scares him most. Location: Voyageurs, National Park, Minnesota. Date: November 19th, 2017. The first snow of the season arrived without ceremony, falling in thick curtains across the black mirror surface of Kabetogama Lake. Nathan Cole stood at the window of the Ash River Visitor Center, watching the flakes dissolve into the water while steam rose from the coffee mug warming his hands. 6 years with the National Park Service, 4 of them here at Voyageurs, and he still found himself pausing at moments like this, when the world went quiet and white, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. The station radio crackled with the morning weather report out of International Falls. Temperatures dropping through the 20s, wind chill advisory in effect by nightfall, accumulation of 8 to 12 inches expected, nothing unusual for mid-November in northern Minnesota, but enough to close most of the backcountry access points and send the last of the seasonal staff home for the winter. Nathan was one of 3 rangers remaining until spring, a skeleton crew to monitor the frozen landscape, check on the occasional ice fisherman, and wait out the long months of darkness. He finished his coffee and began his morning equipment check, a ritual so ingrained it required no conscious thought. Flashlight batteries full, GPS unit, charged and calibrated, emergency beacon, functional, radio, clear on all frequencies. He tested the channel to dispatch, received confirmation from Eileen's familiar voice, and noted the time in his logbook. The routine was a kind of prayer, he sometimes thought, small acts of preparation against the vast indifference of the wilderness. Outside, the temperature had already dropped 3 degrees since dawn. Nathan pulled on his insulated parka and stepped onto the wooden deck, his boots leaving the first prints in the accumulating snow. The air carried that particular scent of northern winter, pine resin sharpened by cold, the metallic promise of more snow to come, the faint organic undertone of the lake preparing to freeze. Familiar sounds filled the morning despite the snowfall. The distant honking of the last Canada geese heading south, the creak of cold-stressed branches, the soft percussion of snow landing on snow. He walked the perimeter of the visitor center, checking the building's winterization, ensuring no wildlife had found its way into the storage sheds. A set of wolf tracks crossed the parking lot. 5 animals, maybe 6, heading northeast toward the Kabetogama Peninsula. He photographed them for the wildlife monitoring database, noting their size and spacing. Healthy pack, well-fed before the lean months. He knew these wolves, or at least knew of them. The Moose Bay pack, they called them, though wolves respected no human boundaries or names. Back inside, he reviewed the trail registry from the previous day. Only one entry. Grace Holloway, solo hiker, signed in at 7:43 a.m. for the Cruiser Lake Trail. Signed out, blank. Nathan checked his watch. 8:15 a.m. She would have had to leave before dark yesterday to reach her car, and the parking lot had been empty when he arrived at 7. He felt the first small needle of concern, the professional instinct that preceded conscious worry. He keyed his radio. Dispatch, this is Ash River, over. Go ahead, Ash River. I've got an unsigned trail registry from yesterday. Solo hiker, Cruiser Lake Trail. Can you run the vehicle registration for the lot? Should be the only car there. A pause. Checking now. Static then. Registration comes back to Grace Holloway, age 34, address in Duluth. Emergency contact listed as Margaret Holloway, mother, same address. Copy that. I'm going to take a drive up to the trailhead, verify the vehicle's still there. Understood. Check in at 30-minute intervals, weather's coming in fast. Nathan grabbed his pack, already loaded with emergency supplies, a habit bordering on compulsion, and headed for his truck. The snow was falling harder now, beginning to erase the world's edges. As he pulled out of the lot, he noticed the silence that had settled over the forest. No birds, no wind through the pines, just the hiss of snow against his windshield and the growl of the engine. He told himself it was the weather. Animals go quiet before a storm. It meant nothing. Grace had chosen the Cruiser Lake Trail for its solitude. That was what she told herself anyway. What she'd written in her journal that morning, sitting in her car as the sun rose over water, so still, it looked like poured metal. Solitude. Space to think. The divorce papers had been signed for 3 weeks, and she still woke each morning reaching for a body that wasn't there. The trail, all 9 miles of it, promised nothing but trees and sky and the simple clarity of physical exhaustion. She had done everything right. Checked the weather. Cold but clear through the afternoon, snow arriving overnight. Signed the trail registry with her name, her route, her expected return time of 4 p.m. Packed the 10 essentials, plus a few extras. Her father had been an Eagle Scout, and his voice still echoed in her head when she prepared for the backcountry. Flashlight, first aid kit, map, compass, knife, fire starter, emergency blanket, extra food, extra water, rain gear. She was prepared. She was capable. She had hiked alone 100 times. The trail wound through boreal forest, past beaver ponds and granite outcroppings. the landscape slowly revealing itself in layers. She saw a fox in the first hour, its rust-colored coat startling against the gray-green of the pines. Later, a bald eagle circling over one of the smaller lakes, hunting for fish before the ice locked them away. The cold pressed against her cheeks like a lover's hands, and she found herself smiling for the first time in weeks. By noon, she had reached the halfway point and stopped for lunch on a sun-warmed rock. The sky had begun to change, clouds thickening from the northwest, the light taking on that yellow-gray quality that precedes snow. Earlier than predicted, she noted. She would need to pick up her pace on the return. It was on the way back that the trail began to feel wrong. Not wrong in any way she could name at first, just a sense of unfamiliarity, as if she were walking the route for the first time instead of retracing her morning's path. The trees seemed denser here, hadn't they? And that boulder formation, she didn't remember passing it before. But she was on the trail. The blazes were still there, faded orange diamonds nailed to the bark every 100 yards or so. She was not lost. She could not be lost. The first snow began to fall at 2:17 p.m. She checked her watch twice to be certain. Light flurries at first, the kind that melt on contact, but the clouds overhead promised more. She quickened her pace. At 2:45 she stopped. The trail split ahead of her, two paths diverging into identical stretches of forest. She had not passed any junction on the way in. She was certain of that. Absolutely certain. She pulled out her map, orientating it with her compass, and found no corresponding junction. According to the map, the trail ran straight for another mile before curving south toward the trailhead. Grace stood very still, the snow falling on her shoulders, and listened. No wind, no birdsong, no sound at all except her own breathing, which had grown shallow and quick without her noticing. The silence pressed against her eardrums like depth pressure. "Hello?" she called, and her voice fell dead in the air, absorbed by the trees and the snow and the impossible quiet. She chose the left path. It felt arbitrary, a coin flip without a coin. The trail seemed to narrow as she walked, the trees crowding closer, their branches interlacing overhead until the gray sky became a memory seen through latticed fingers of pine. The snow was falling harder now. She could no longer see her footprints behind her. Nathan found Grace Holloway's car exactly where the registration said it would be. A blue Subaru Outback parked at the Cruiser Lake trailhead, already wearing a white cap of snow. He checked the hood. Cold. It hadn't been started in hours, probably since yesterday morning. He tried the doors. Locked. Inside, he could see a travel mug in the cup holder, a fleece jacket folded on the passenger seat, a book splayed open on the dashboard. Someone expecting to return. He radioed dispatch. "Vehicle confirmed at trailhead. No sign of the hiker. I'm going to head up the trail, see if I can make contact." "Copy. Ash River. Be advised. Visibility is dropping. We're looking at whiteout conditions within 2 hours." "Understood. I'll stay on the main trail. Turn back if conditions deteriorate." He shouldered his pack and started up the trail, following the orange blazes that appeared at regular intervals like a trail of breadcrumbs leading into the white unknown. The snow had already accumulated 2 inches, enough to obscure any tracks from the previous day. If Grace Holloway had come this way, the evidence was gone. The forest closed around him as he walked, the familiar landscape transformed by weather into something older and stranger. He knew these trails, had walked them dozens of times in every season, but the snow had a way of rewriting the world, erasing landmarks, making the known unknown. He moved carefully, checking his GPS every few minutes, confirming his position against the map in his head. 30 minutes in, he found the first anomaly. A set of tracks crossed the trail ahead of him. Human tracks, boot prints pressed deep into the snow, fresh, no more than an hour old based on the accumulation in the impressions. They came from the east, crossed the trail at a perpendicular angle, and continued west into untracked forest. No blazed trail ran east-west here. Nathan checked his map again. Nothing. He photographed the tracks, noted the coordinates, and continued north. The prints had been heading away from the trailhead, deeper into the backcountry, away from safety. Another 15 minutes passed. The snow intensified, cutting visibility to perhaps 50 yards. Nathan could feel the temperature dropping, the cold finding its way through the seams of his parka. He was beginning to calculate the point of no return, the moment when continuing the search would become more dangerous than abandoning it, when he heard the voice. "Hello? Is someone there?" A woman's voice, coming from somewhere off the trail to his left. Weak, but clear. He stopped, trying to pinpoint the direction. "Hello? This is Park Service. Call out again." Silence. Then, from his right, "Please help me." The same voice. The same woman. But the direction had changed. Nathan stood very still. Sound could do strange things in snowfall, bouncing off trees distorted by wind, creating illusions of location. He knew this. He had trained for this. But there was no wind. The air was utterly still, the snow falling straight down like a curtain being lowered across a stage. He keyed his radio. "Dispatch, I've got possible voice contact with the missing hiker, attempting to establish location." Static answered him. Not clean static, something underneath it, something that almost sounded like breathing. "Dispatch, do you copy?" The static shifted, formed itself into something that might have been words. "Come closer." Nathan checked the radio's frequency. Correct. Checked the battery. Full. The equipment was working. The problem was somewhere else. "Hello?" He called again into the forest. This time the response came from ahead of him, from the direction of the trail itself. "Nathan, I'm over here, Nathan." He knew that voice. Eileen, from dispatch. But Eileen was 30 miles away, in the ranger station at Kabetogama. Eileen, who had been on the radio with him not 10 minutes ago. Eileen, whose voice now came from somewhere in the trees ahead, impossible and wrong. "Nathan, come find me, I'm so cold." Grace had been walking for 2 hours when she realized she was going in circles. The same fallen log, the same cluster of birch trees with their white bark peeling like dead skin, the same granite outcropping shaped like a sleeping bear. She had passed them 3 times now. 3 times, though she had been walking in a straight line, following the trail, never deviating. The snow was up to her calves. Her fingers had gone numb despite her gloves. The light was failing, though it was barely 4 o'clock. In the North Country in November, darkness came early and stayed late. She stopped at the Sleeping Bear Rock and tried her phone for the 100th time. No signal. She had known there wouldn't be. She had known when she started this hike that she would be out of range. But the ritual of checking had become a compulsion, a small magic against the growing understanding that she was in serious trouble. Something was moving in the trees. She saw it in her peripheral vision, a shape passing between the trunks, too tall to be a deer, too silent to be a bear. When she turned to look directly, there was nothing, just trees and snow in the deepening dark. But she could feel it now, that prickling awareness at the back of her neck that meant something was watching. Something was waiting. "Who's there?" Her voice sounded small and thin, swallowed by the snow. From somewhere behind her she heard her mother's voice. "Grace, honey, where are you? We're all looking for you." Her mother was in Duluth. Her mother was 63 years old and hadn't been hiking in a decade. Her mother was not here. "Grace, just follow my voice. Come toward my voice." The sound came from deeper in the forest, away from the trail, away from any direction that made sense. And even as her mind screamed that it was wrong, that it was impossible, that it was not her mother, Grace felt her feet begin to move. One step, then another, toward the voice that was not a voice, into the trees that seemed to lean toward her like hungry mouths. She stopped herself, planted her feet, forced her hands into fists against the urge to walk. "No," she said aloud. "No, you're not real." The voice stopped. And then from much closer, so close she should have been able to see whoever was speaking, a different voice. "Aren't I?" It was her own voice. Her own voice coming from the darkness between the trees. Nathan had abandoned the trail. He knew it was wrong. Everything in his training screamed that it was wrong, but the voice had come again, Eileen's voice, and then another voice he recognized, his sister Rachel, who had died 3 years ago, who had been buried in the family plot in Wisconsin, whose voice he had not heard since the last phone call before the accident. "Nathan, I miss you. Please come find me. I'm so cold here, Nathan. I'm so cold." He was not following the voice. He would not follow the voice, but he was no longer on the trail, and when he checked his GPS, the screen showed only static. The same static that had infected his radio, the same static that seemed to be spreading through every piece of equipment he carried. The snow was blinding now, true whiteout conditions. He could see perhaps 10 feet in any direction. The trees appeared and disappeared like ghosts, there and then gone, replaced by identical trees in identical positions. He had lost track of which direction led back to the trailhead. He had lost track of everything except the cold and the silence and the voices that kept coming from the forest, calling his name in the tones of people who could not be here. And then he heard something else, a woman crying. Not a familiar voice this time, not a mimicry, just raw, desperate weeping, coming from somewhere ahead of him in the white darkness. He moved toward it. He found her at the edge of a small clearing. Grace Holloway, he assumed, though he couldn't see her face. She was kneeling in the snow, her back to him, her shoulders shaking with sobs. Snow had accumulated on her jacket, on her hair, as if she had been kneeling there for hours. "Ma'am, are you Grace Holloway? I'm with the Park Service. I'm here to help you." She didn't respond, didn't move, just kept crying. That terrible, broken sound. Nathan approached slowly, one hand on the radio that no longer worked, the other extended toward her shoulder. "Ma'am, can you hear me? We need to get you out of here. There's a storm coming in." He touched her shoulder. She was cold. Not cold the way a living person gets cold. Not the chill of exposed skin, the shivering of a body fighting hypothermia. She was cold the way stone is cold, the way water is cold, the way the endless Minnesota winter is cold. Cold that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with absence. He pulled his hand back. His fingers had gone numb where they touched her. Slowly, she turned to face him. Grace Holloway's eyes were gone. Not damaged, not closed, simply gone, replaced by dark hollows that seemed to extend far deeper than her skull should allow. Her mouth was open, still producing that weeping sound, but her lips weren't moving. The sound came from somewhere inside her or behind her, or from the forest itself using her as a speaker. "I'm so hungry," she said, in a voice that was not her voice. "I'm so hungry and so cold." Nathan ran. He ran without direction, without thought, without any of the training that should have kept him calm. Trees loomed out of the whiteness and he dodged them, or he didn't. Branches tearing at his face, his coat, his hands. He could hear something behind him. Footsteps in the snow, keeping pace, never falling back. And ahead of him, somehow ahead of him, that weeping, that endless weeping, coming from everywhere and nowhere. His foot caught a root hidden beneath the snow. He went down hard, the impact driving the breath from his lungs. For a moment he lay there, gasping, staring up at the white sky as the snow fell on his face. The footsteps stopped. Silence. Complete and absolute silence. Nathan sat up slowly. The forest around him was empty. No figure pursuing him, no shape in the trees, no sign that anything had ever been there. Just snow and silence and the distant suggestion of trees fading into white. He checked his GPS. It was working again, showing his position clearly. He was half a mile from the trail, a mile and a half from the trailhead. His radio crackled and Eileen's voice, the real Eileen, he knew it was the real Eileen, came through. "Ash River, what's your status? You missed your check-in." He keyed the radio with shaking hands. "I'm here, I'm coming back." "The hiker..." He stopped. What could he say? "The hiker is gone. Visibility's 0. I'm aborting the search." "Copy that. Return to trailhead. We'll reassess in the morning." Nathan stood. His body ached. His face was bleeding from a dozen small cuts. His hands had gone numb inside his gloves. He began to walk, following the GPS coordinates, not looking back. Behind him, very faintly, he heard someone call his name. They found Grace Holloway's body 4 days later, after the storm passed and the search teams could finally access the backcountry. She was located 2 miles north of the Cruiser Lake Trail, in a section of forest that showed no evidence of human passage, no broken branches, no disturbed snow, no tracks of any kind. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death as hypothermia, complicated by apparent cardiac arrest. The report noted several unusual findings: severe frostbite inconsistent with the time of exposure, unexplained abrasions around the mouth and throat, and a facial expression that one of the search team members, in an unguarded moment, described as, like she died screaming, but there wasn't any sound. Nathan Cole submitted his incident report with the minimum required detail. Lost contact with dispatch due to equipment malfunction. Failed to locate the missing hiker due to weather conditions. Returned to trailhead at approximately 5:30 p.m. He did not mention the voices. He did not mention what he found in the clearing. He did not mention the cold that had seeped into his fingers when he touched her, the cold that had never quite gone away. He put in for a transfer the following week. Arizona maybe, or New Mexico. Somewhere with deserts and open sky, somewhere without forests, without the dark spaces between trees where things could hide and wait and call your name in voices that should not exist. The transfer was denied. Budget cuts, they told him. Insufficient staffing. He would need to remain at Voyageurs through the winter. At night, in his cabin at the edge of the park, Nathan lies awake and listens to the wind moving through the pines. Sometimes when the wind dies down, he hears something else. Footsteps in the snow outside his window, circling slowly, patiently, as if someone were waiting for an invitation. And sometimes, very faintly, he hears a voice that sounds almost like his own, asking him to come outside, asking him to follow, promising that it won't hurt, promising that the cold only lasts a moment. He never opens the door, but some nights in that space between waking and sleep, he finds himself standing at the window with his hand on the latch, and he cannot remember getting out of bed. The hunger is patient. The hunger can wait. Outside, the snow keeps falling, and the forest keeps its secrets. And somewhere in the frozen dark, something that used to be Grace Holloway walks the trails that exist on no map, calling for help in a voice that almost sounds human, waiting for someone to answer. Location: Crater Lake National Park, Oregon. Date: September 8, 2017. The morning briefing at the Crater Lake Ranger Station began like every other morning in early September, with coffee that was stronger than it needed to be and weather forecasts that were increasingly unreliable. Daniel Morrison had been stationed at Crater Lake for 6 years, long enough to understand that the park existed in a state of permanent contradiction. It was one of the most visited national parks in the Pacific Northwest, yet it possessed vast areas of terrain that saw human visitation perhaps 2 or 3 times per year. It was a place of extraordinary natural beauty, the deepest lake in the United States, surrounded by ancient volcanic peaks and dense forest, and simultaneously a place where that beauty concealed genuine danger. Altitude sickness claimed victims regularly. Sudden weather changes had caught hikers unprepared. The water itself was lethal to those unlucky enough to fall in. Not just cold, though at 38 degrees Fahrenheit it was cold enough, but cold in a way that suggested something older than normal winter temperature, something that seemed to penetrate the body from the inside outward. Daniel was 42 years old, 15 years into a career with the Park Service. He'd worked at Yellowstone, at the Grand Canyon, at several smaller parks scattered across the western United States. Crater Lake was his last assignment before retirement, a quiet place he'd thought when he'd taken the position, a place to coast out the final years of his career. The park typically saw its heaviest traffic in summer, and early September marked the beginning of the shoulder season, when crowds began to thin and the staff could breathe again, except the Weather Service was forecasting severe thunderstorms to develop throughout the afternoon and evening. the kind of storms that sometimes materialized rapidly at high elevations without significant warning. The atmospheric pressure was dropping. The humidity was building. All of the indicators suggested that what had been a beautifully clear morning would transition to something considerably more hostile by evening. Daniel reviewed the current permit register. 4 parties held overnight permits, spread across different areas of the park. A family group at Watchman Campground, 2 couples at Lost Creek Campground, and a solo backpacker named Grace Morrison, no relation to Daniel, though he'd noticed the shared surname when processing the permit, who was doing a 3-day trek through the Phantom Ship area and the Northern Rim trails. Grace's permit indicated she was an experienced backcountry hiker with credentials from several mountaineering organizations. She'd planned to camp the first night at Prickly Pear Flat, the second night at the Northern Rim Overlook, and would exit at the East Rim trailhead on the 3rd day. Her itinerary was ambitious but reasonable for someone with her stated experience level. Daniel pulled up her permit photograph. Grace Morrison was a woman in her early 30s, dark hair, the kind of direct, unflinching gaze that Daniel recognized in people who spent significant time in wilderness. She carried the credentials she claimed: mountaineering certifications, wilderness first aid, rescue training. Her permit notes indicated she was documenting plant species adaptation at high elevation, research-focused rather than recreational. Daniel approved it without hesitation. That was something he would remember later. The simple decision made in a few seconds to trust the credentials and the photograph and the assumption that experience meant safety. It was not a bad decision. It was simply a human decision, made with incomplete information in the way that all decisions are made. The weather report had revised upward, now calling for thunderstorm potential increasing to high by 1600 hours. The atmospheric conditions were extremely unstable. Temperature inversions were likely. Wind shear was a possibility. The typical advisory was to stay off exposed ridges and peaks during such conditions. Daniel made a note to contact the permit holders via radio during the afternoon, check that they were aware of the forecast and prepared to seek shelter if needed. By 1100 hours, the sky had begun to change, not dramatically. The sun was still visible, the clouds still wispy, but with a quality of transition that suggested the atmosphere was reorganizing itself. Daniel could smell it in the air. Ozone, the metallic tang that precedes electrical storms, the scent of moisture gathering at altitude. He filled another thermos with coffee and prepared to drive out to the Rim Trail parking area. It was protocol to make visual inspections of permit holder locations if severe weather was anticipated. He wanted to establish baseline conditions before the storms developed. The drive from the station to the crater rim took about 20 minutes, depending on which access point he was heading toward. This morning he was heading northeast, toward the North Rim area where Grace Morrison's second camp would be located tomorrow, or where she would shelter if the weather deteriorated faster than expected. The road climbed steadily, the elevation increasing, the temperature correspondingly dropping. By the time Daniel reached the parking area near the North Rim Trail, he was perhaps 6,000 feet above sea level, high enough that the air had a noticeably different quality, thinner, clearer, but also more vulnerable to rapid weather changes. He stepped out of the vehicle and stood for a moment assessing. The lake was visible from this vantage point, a massive body of impossibly blue water, the deepest lake in the country, created by a volcanic collapse that had occurred more than 7,000 years ago. The water was so deep and so pure that light seemed to penetrate impossibly far down before being absorbed entirely. Daniel had always found it beautiful and slightly unsettling in equal measure. It was the kind of place that suggested both human insignificance and the presence of something older, something that had been here long before the mountain existed in its current form. The trail from this location descended toward the water, eventually reaching some of the most remote backcountry in the park. Grace's itinerary would have her spending the first night at Prickly Pear Flat, a meadow area relatively close to the rim, and then moving to the Northern Rim Overlook for the second night. Both locations were defensible, open enough that she could see approaching weather, with potential shelter nearby. Daniel checked his radio. The frequency was clear. He activated it. "Dispatch, this is Unit 1, Northside Rim location, confirming permit holder status for Phantom Ship area. Stand by." Copy, Unit 1, came the response. Go ahead. We'll be conducting visual trail inspection from North Rim down to Prickly Pear Flat. Expect to be out of service for approximately 2 hours. We'll check back in at 1300 hours. Copy. Weather advisory remains in effect. Severe thunderstorms potential developing. Watch conditions. Daniel acknowledged and began hiking. The trail descended gradually, following the contours of the mountainside, offering periodic views of the lake. The forest here was dense, whitebark pines, Douglas firs, the understory thick with smaller vegetation. The air was clear and cool. The only sounds were wind, his own footsteps, and the distant cry of what sounded like a raven somewhere higher up the mountain. He moved at a steady pace, his eyes on the trail, looking for evidence of recent passage. Grace Morrison would have come through here yesterday or early this morning, heading toward her first camp. The trail showed signs of foot traffic, recent prints in the softer sections, displaced rocks on switchbacks, the minimal disturbance that an experienced hiker creates. Daniel found one of her campsites relatively quickly. She'd chosen a small protected area perhaps a mile from the Rim parking lot. Established minimal impact camp, clearly taken care to ensure she was following wilderness ethics. He continued down toward Prickly Pear Flat, estimating she would be camped somewhere in that meadow area if her itinerary was accurate. The trail grew slightly steeper as it descended toward the flatter terrain. Daniel was moving quickly now, confident in the terrain, his attention mostly on the sky and the changing light quality. The clouds were building more noticeably now, towering cumulus formations developing to the south and west, the kind of cloud development that suggested rapid intensification. He checked his watch. 12:45 hours. He would establish contact with Grace in another 30 minutes, confirm her status, brief her on the weather situation, and head back toward the Rim. The storm would likely develop between 1500 and 1700 hours, based on the current conditions. She would have time to secure her camp and prepare for weather. At 13:05 hours, Daniel reached the edge of Prickly Pear Flat, where the forest opened into a meadow. The meadow was beautiful, a wide, open space at relatively high elevation, surrounded by the dark walls of forest dominated by a massive lightning rod of a peak that rose from the center of the flat. Daniel had always understood, on an intellectual level, that peaks attracted lightning. Seeing a peak that obvious, that dramatically isolated, that clearly designated by topography as the thing that will get struck during a thunderstorm, created a visceral understanding of why you didn't camp directly beneath such formations. Grace Morrison's camp was positioned intelligently, not in the meadow itself, which would be exposed if storms developed, but in the transitional zone between forest and meadow, where she had adequate warning of approaching weather but some shelter from the forest canopy. She had established a small tent, created a fire pit, arranged her equipment efficiently. Daniel could see no sign of Grace herself. He approached the camp and called out, "Grace? Hello? Park Service Ranger checking on permit holders." No response. He waited 30 seconds. A minute. "Grace Morrison?" Still nothing. Daniel approached the camp more directly. The tent was zipped closed. The equipment was arranged but showed no sign of imminent occupation. The fire pit contained no ashes, suggesting she hadn't made camp here yet, which contradicted the permit itinerary, which specified she should have been here already. Daniel activated his radio. "Dispatch Unit 1, I'm at the Prickly Pear Flat camp location. Permit holder is not present. Equipment is staged but no indication of occupation. Recommend we attempt radio contact and clarify status." Copy, Unit 1. Attempting radio contact on permit frequency. There was a delay. Then, "Unit 1, no response from permit holder. What's your assessment?" Daniel looked at the camp. The equipment was there. The tent was there. But Grace was not. Several possibilities. She'd decided to hike further than planned, reaching the Northern Rim location today and planning to camp there instead. She'd become injured or disoriented and was somewhere on the trail. She'd decided to abandon the permit and exit the park entirely. None of these scenarios were immediately alarming, but the combination of approaching severe weather and a missing permit holder created an elevated status. Dispatch, I'm going to hike to the northern rim location and see if she's established camp there. Stand by. Daniel marked the current location on his GPS and began hiking toward the rim. The trail climbed steadily now, the elevation gain noticeable, the air getting progressively thinner and cooler. The clouds were building more dramatically now. The southern sky had darkened considerably, and Daniel could see the characteristic dark wall of a storm system beginning to take shape. He checked his watch. 13:40 hours. If Grace was at the rim location, he could briefly confirm her status, radio dispatch, and begin heading back before the weather deteriorated further. If she wasn't there, he would need to begin a more systematic search and would probably need to call in additional resources. The trail became steeper as he approached the rim area. The forest thinned. The landscape became more dramatic. Exposed rock, harsh winds channeling down the mountainside. Daniel was moving carefully now, aware that exposed ridges during severe weather were genuinely dangerous. The wind was already picking up, gusts that periodically staggered him, that made it difficult to maintain balance on the narrower sections of trail. He crested the ridge at 14:05 hours and looked across the rim overlook. The view was spectacular and terrifying in equal measure. The lake sprawled below him, impossibly blue, impossibly deep. The opposite rim was visible, the crater walls dropping sharply to the water level. Clouds were moving in from the south faster than they should move, the kind of rapid cloud advance that suggested a weather system was not just developing but intensifying. And on the rim itself, perhaps 50 meters from Daniel's position, there was a figure. At first, Daniel thought it was Grace. The figure was standing at the very edge of the overlook, facing the lake, completely motionless. She was wearing hiking clothes consistent with what he'd seen at the Prickly Pear camp location. Her posture was strange though, arms slightly raised, as if she was reaching toward something, or as if something was pulling at her. "Grace?" Daniel called. He had to raise his voice to be heard over the wind. "Grace Morrison?" The figure didn't turn, didn't respond, didn't move. Daniel approached carefully, aware of the dangerous proximity to the cliff edge, aware that the wind was strong enough to potentially destabilize someone standing that close to a precipice. "Grace, I'm Park Ranger Daniel Morrison. Let's move away from the edge. Weather is getting bad fast." The figure slowly turned. It took several seconds, an unnaturally slow rotation, as if the movement required tremendous effort or was being controlled by something other than normal muscle response. When the face came into view, Daniel felt his blood immediately go cold. It was not Grace Morrison. The figure had Grace Morrison's clothes, but the face was wrong. The features were recognizable as human but distorted. The skin seemed to have a strange quality, almost translucent, as if it was being viewed through water or through some kind of distorting medium. The eyes were looking at him, but the gaze seemed unfocused, as if the thing behind those eyes was simultaneously looking directly at him and looking through him at something entirely different. "You shouldn't be here," the figure said. Its voice was Grace Morrison's voice, but layered underneath it was something else. A harmonic undertone, as if multiple voices were speaking simultaneously. "The mountain is calling. Can't you hear it? Can't you feel it? It's been so long since something answered." Daniel stepped back. His instinct was to reach for his radio, but he was frozen, processing what he was seeing. "Where is Grace Morrison?" he said. "Where is the permit holder?" The thing wearing Grace's face smiled. The smile was not entirely wrong, but it was wrong enough to register as deeply disturbing. The angles weren't quite right. The teeth seemed to be in slightly different positions than they should be. "She's here. She's always been here. We all are. We're in the deep water, in the places where light doesn't reach, in the spaces between moments." The sky behind the figure darkened dramatically. The cloud system had advanced with visible speed. What had been distant now loomed directly overhead, the leading edge of the storm system reaching the rim. Wind gusted with enough force to make Daniel stagger. When he looked back at the figure, it was moving. Not walking, but gliding in a way that suggested the normal relationship between intent and motion had been severed. Daniel turned and ran. He had no other option. The thing that was wearing Grace Morrison's face was moving toward him with increasing speed, and the wind was building, and the sky was turning from dark gray to almost black. He ran back down the trail the way he'd come, his feet slipping on loose rock, his heart hammering in his chest with the visceral certainty that he was running from something that should not exist. Grace Morrison had left the prickly pear flat camp at 0900 hours that morning, heading toward the northern rim overlook. The weather had been clear at that point with the kind of visibility that was rare. She could see for miles in every direction. The landscape spread out below her like a map, every detail crystal clear. She'd been hiking well, maintaining good pace, enjoying the solitude and the natural beauty of the high country. By noon, she'd reached the rim trail junction and had decided to explore a side route that wasn't on her official permit, a narrow trail that led to a spectacular overlook that wasn't marked on many maps. She knew it existed from her research into the park. She'd found references to it in old hiking guides, and she wanted to photograph the view for her documentation project. The trail had been narrow, barely more than a footpath, but well-defined. She'd hiked it carefully, aware that she was moving away from her planned route and away from the major trails. By 1300 hours, she'd reached the overlook and had begun setting up her camera equipment, wanting to capture the view while the sun was still clear and the light was optimal. That was when she'd heard the sound. It had been subtle at first, so subtle she'd almost missed it. A sound like wind, but with a quality to it that suggested intent, like something breathing, like something very large moving through the air above her. She'd looked up and had seen nothing except clear sky, blue overhead, the darker clouds building on the distant horizon to the south. The sound had continued, grew louder. She realized, with a clarity that had arrived not as fear but as simple recognition of fact, that something in the sky was moving directly above her, obscured by, what? Clouds that hadn't been there before? Light refraction? The natural impossibility of her own perception? She'd heard the voice before she'd seen anything. It had been a voice like thunder, not a sound created by a creature, but the sound itself given intelligence and presence. It had spoken in Klamath, a language Grace didn't understand, but the meaning had come through anyway, not through her ears but through some other perception, some part of her consciousness that existed outside normal sensory channels. The message was simple. You are here. That is enough. Come deeper. Come where the light doesn't go. Come where we are waiting. Grace had tried to resist. She had very clearly understood that something was wrong, that whatever was in the sky above her was not something that existed within normal natural parameters. She had backed away from the overlook edge. She had tried to activate her satellite communicator, but her hands had not obeyed. Her feet had not obeyed. Something had taken control of her nervous system, overriding the normal relationship between thought and action. She had found herself walking, not toward the trail she'd come from, but toward the rim edge. She had found herself moving as if she was being guided or piloted or controlled by something that knew exactly where it wanted her to be. The voice had continued speaking in Klamath, in English, in languages she didn't recognize. It had told her about the mountain. It had told her that the mountain had been here long before humans, that it had created itself through its own will, that it had been waiting for someone to understand. It had told her that humans lived on top of the mountain, while the mountain lived underneath them, and that the arrangement was temporary, and that sometimes the mountain reached up and reclaimed what belonged to it. Grace had tried to scream. Her throat had refused to produce sound. She had tried to fight against the force that was controlling her movement. Her muscles had not responded. She had watched with the strange dissociation of someone experiencing profound trauma, as her body had moved to the very edge of the rim overlook and had stopped there, waiting. When the ranger had appeared, Grace's consciousness had recognized him as a potential rescuer. She'd tried to call out to him, but the control that had taken over her body had been absolute. She'd heard herself speaking, but the words were not hers. She'd watched her face move, but the expressions were wrong. She'd existed as a passenger in her own body, watching from behind her own eyes as something else used her voice and her face to communicate with the ranger. She understood with a horror that was absolute That the thing that had taken control was showing the ranger what had happened to her. It was demonstrating what happened when you entered the mountain's territory, when you came to the high places where the ancient things still dwelt. And then the ranger had run, and something had changed. The control had released slightly, not fully, but enough that Grace could perceive multiple realities at once. She was standing on the rim. She was falling through the air. She was already in the water below, the impossibly cold water. The water that was not quite water, but something else. Something that had been there before the lake. Something that dwelt in the deepest places and had been waiting for the sky thing to guide prey down to it. Dosing. Daniel made it back to the rim parking area at 14:45 hours, soaked in sweat despite the dropping temperature, his heart still racing at dangerous levels. He reached his vehicle and immediately activated his radio on the emergency channel. Dispatch, this is Unit 1. I have a critical situation at the North Rim area. Permit holder Grace Morrison is missing, presumed in distress. Location is North Rim Overlook. I encountered something unusual at that location. Requesting immediate backup and emergency services. I'm declaring a full search and rescue activation. There was a pause. Then, Unit 1, clarify your situation. Are you injured? Do you require medical assistance? Negative, Daniel said. He was taking deep breaths, trying to calm his racing heart rate, trying to process what he'd seen. I'm uninjured. But there is a permit holder in danger. I need backup at the North Rim Overlook. The weather is deteriorating rapidly. Copy Unit 1. We're mobilizing rescue volunteers. ETA approximately 30 minutes. Please remain at your location and provide updates. Daniel sat in his vehicle with the engine running, the heater warming him, watching the sky darken outside the windshield. The storm front was now directly overhead. The wind was reaching near gale force. The rain was beginning. First scattered drops that quickly became a downpour. Lightning flickered in the distance and the rumble of thunder followed seconds later. He tried to process what he'd seen. A hallucination, brought on by stress and rapid altitude change. A person in extreme psychological distress, moving and speaking in ways that his brain had misinterpreted. An elaborate prank by someone who knew he was coming. None of these explanations fit the reality of what he'd experienced, but they were the only explanations that existed within the normal parameters of what was possible. The radio crackled. Unit 1, we've got 5 rescue volunteers en route. They'll be at your location in approximately 20 minutes. Dispatch is also attempting radio contact with the permit holder. No response on satellite frequency. Copy, Daniel said. I'll brief them when they arrive. What would he tell them? That he'd seen a figure wearing the missing hiker's face moving with unnatural grace. That it had spoken to him in a voice that seemed to exist independently of the body producing it. That it had suggested the permit holder was already dead, already in the water, already claimed by something that dwelt in the crater itself. Lightning struck nearby, close enough that Daniel felt the electromagnetic pulse wash over the vehicle, close enough that the thunder was simultaneous with the flash. No delay between light and sound. The rain was coming down in sheets now, the visibility reduced to perhaps 20 meters. The high wind was rocking the vehicle. Daniel sat in the darkness and waited for the rescue team. The search continued for 4 days. The rescue volunteers covered every accessible trail, examined every campsite, called out for Grace in the places where echoes would carry. The weather cleared somewhat, not completely, but enough that helicopter support could be brought in to survey areas that were inaccessible by foot. The volunteers examined the rim overlook where Daniel had encountered the figure. They found nothing. No disturbance, no evidence of violence, no indication that anyone had been there. Grace Morrison was never found. Her tent remained at Prickly Pear Flat. Her equipment stayed at the overlook. Her vehicle remained in the parking area. But the permit holder herself simply ceased to exist in any manner that could be recovered or cataloged. The official report cited undetermined circumstances and possible accident involving proximity to water. Daniel's account of what he'd seen was noted in the file as Ranger report of possible medical episode or perceptual distortion due to altitude and stress. The case was closed pending any new evidence. Daniel remained at Crater Lake for 2 more years before requesting a transfer. He spent those 2 years monitoring weather patterns obsessively, avoiding the rim areas during storm development, maintaining constant awareness of the sky. He heard stories in those 2 years, from other rangers and from longtime park employees. Stories about hikers who had disappeared in previous years. Stories about the sound of wings during thunderstorms, wings that seemed too large to belong to any natural bird. Stories about the way the lake seemed to behave differently during severe weather, the water moving in patterns that didn't correspond to wind direction, the surface occasionally showing disturbances that suggested something very large moving beneath it. He transferred to a park in the Great Plains, flat country, open sky, nowhere for things to hide. He told himself that what he'd experienced was explainable. He told himself that Grace Morrison had simply fallen into the lake during a moment of distraction, that the thing he'd seen on the rim had been some kind of psychological projection of his own fears. But late at night, when thunderstorms rolled across the plains, Daniel would hear it, the sound of wings moving through the storm, too large to be anything natural, too intelligent to be anything accidental, and he would understand, with a certainty that lived beneath logic and reason, that the thing that dwelt in Crater Lake had impressed itself upon him, had marked him as a witness to its presence, and would keep that connection alive for whatever remained of his life. Years later, after he'd retired from the Park Service entirely, Daniel would move to the coast, to a place where the sky met the water in unbroken continuity. He would live quietly, avoiding high places, avoiding wilderness. He would watch thunderstorms develop and dissolve over the ocean, and he would recognize in each flash of lightning a kind of intelligence, ancient, patient, waiting for the next opportunity to reach up from the depths and claim what wandered too close to the edges of things. The lake still exists. The crater still stands. The thunderbird still dwells in the spaces where storms are born, in the places where the ancient power that created the mountain continues to express itself. It claims hikers sometimes, the ones who venture too far from marked trails, who camp in places where the warning signs are written in landscape and weather, and the behavior of animals that sense something humans are too limited to perceive. Daniel Morrison never returned to Crater Lake, but sometimes in his final years he would receive letters, postcards mostly, from an address that he never investigated too carefully. They were postmarked from the Crater Lake area, and they contained only images, the lake from various angles, the rim at sunset, the sky during approaching storms. There was never any text, never any explanation. Daniel would burn them immediately upon receiving them, but they continued to arrive with the regularity of seasons. The mountain remembers those who intrude upon its domain. The thunderbird watches from the storm spaces above, waiting for the next visitor to wander too far, to camp too close, to hear the voice in the thunder and decide to answer. Some calls from the wilderness should never be answered. The coffee had gone cold in Nathan's thermos by the time he noticed. He'd been standing at the window of the Kabetogama ranger station for nearly 10 minutes, watching the gray sky press down on the water like a hand slowly closing. November had stripped the birches bare, and the aspens stood like pale bones against the dark mass of pines that rolled endlessly toward the Canadian border. The lake had begun to freeze in the shallows, thin ice forming crystalline fingers that reached toward the deeper water where the current still moved. It wouldn't hold weight yet, wouldn't hold anything for weeks, maybe longer if the temperatures kept fluctuating the way they had been. Nathan poured the cold coffee into the sink and started a fresh pot. The station smelled like it always did this time of year. Wood smoke from the pellet stove, the faint mustiness of old maps and logbooks, the particular staleness of a building that would see few visitors until spring. Most of the summer staff had gone home in September. The seasonal rangers had followed in October. Now it was just Nathan, holding down Kabetogama, while Jim Reeves covered the Rainy Lake District 20 miles north. Skeleton crew. The Park Service called it winter operations, but Nathan had always thought of it as caretaking, watching over something vast and sleeping, waiting for it to wake again. He checked the weather radio while the coffee brewed. The mechanical voice recited what he already knew: a system moving down from Manitoba, temperatures dropping into the teens by nightfall, 6 to 8 inches of snow expected before morning. Nothing unusual for mid-November in northern Minnesota. He'd seen worse. The park had seen worse. Voyageurs had weathered centuries of winters before the government drew lines on maps and called it protected land. The Ojibwe had lived here for generations before that, and before them, others whose names were forgotten. The land remembered, even if the people didn't. His morning patrol route took him along the Locator Lake Trail, a 4-mile loop through mixed forest that connected to the longer chain of lakes Portage. In summer, the trail saw steady traffic: canoeists, kayakers, families with children who complained about the mosquitoes. Now it was empty. Nathan's boots crunched on frozen mud as he walked, the sound obscenely loud in the morning stillness. He noted the condition of the trail markers, checked the small footbridge over Locator Creek for ice damage, and paused at the junction with the Portage Trail to examine a fallen birch that would need clearing before spring. The forest held its breath around him. He'd grown used to this particular quality of silence in his 4 years at Voyageurs. Not the absence of sound exactly, but a muffling, as if the trees absorbed noise the way they absorbed light. In summer, birdsong filled the gaps. Now there were only the small sounds: the creak of branches, the distant knock of a woodpecker, the whisper of wind through needles. Nathan knew each of these sounds intimately. He could tell the difference between a red squirrel's chatter and a pine marten's warning call. He knew how snow sounded falling through spruce boughs versus bare maple limbs. This knowledge was his armor, the proof of his competence, his right to be here. He was halfway back to the station when the radio crackled. "Kabetogama, this is Rainy Lake. You copy?" Nathan unclipped the handset from his belt. "Rainy Lake, Kabetogama." "Go ahead, Jim." "Got a vehicle in the Ash River lot. Silver Honda Accord, Minnesota plates. Been there since yesterday afternoon according to the timestamp on the permit. Single occupant registered, female, age 26, planned overnight on the Cruiser Lake Trail. She was supposed to be back by 1600 yesterday." Nathan felt the familiar tightening in his chest that came with every overdue report. Most of the time, it was nothing. Hikers misjudged distances, decided to extend their trips, forgot to check out at the trailhead, but sometimes it wasn't nothing. Any contact attempts? Negative. No cell coverage out there, and she didn't take a satellite phone. I've got her registration info. Name's Brooke Ellison. Address in Duluth. Emergency contact is a sister in Minneapolis. Haven't notified yet. "Weather's coming in," Nathan said. "If she's still out there, I know. I'm tied up with a downed tree blocking the Rainy Lake access road. Can you check the Ash River lot? See if the vehicle's still there? If it is, we'll need to start a search grid." "Copy that. I'll head over now and report back." He clipped the radio to his belt and turned east toward the Ash River access point. The Cruiser Lake Trail was 8 miles round trip through some of the most remote terrain in the park. Old-growth forest, boggy lowlands, and a series of small lakes that froze unpredictably. Good hiking in summer, dangerous in late fall. Nathan tried not to think about what a night in the open would do to someone unprepared for temperatures in the teens. The Silver Accord was exactly where Jim had said it would be, alone in the gravel lot at the end of Ash River Road. Nathan parked beside it and got out, his breath fogging in the cold air. The car was locked, windows frosted over. He wiped a circle clean with his glove and peered inside. A sketchbook lay open on the passenger seat, pencil drawings of trees, water, rocks. The kind of careful observation that suggested someone who really looked at the world. A half-empty water bottle in the cup holder, a fleece jacket draped over the back seat. Small details that assembled themselves into a person, a life, a story that might be ending badly. On the dashboard, tucked under the windshield wiper, was a note in neat handwriting. "Back Wednesday evening. Don't worry. B." Today was Wednesday. The note had been meant for someone who would come looking, someone who was already worried. Nathan radioed Jim with his findings, then retrieved his pack from the truck and started up the Cruiser Lake Trail. The temperature had dropped noticeably since morning. The sky had darkened to the color of old iron, and he could smell snow coming, that particular metallic cleanness that preceded a storm. If Brooke Ellison was still out there, she didn't have much time. Brooke had known she was in trouble since yesterday afternoon, though she hadn't wanted to admit it to herself. The trail had been clear enough for the first 3 miles, orange blazes on trees, occasional wooden posts marking the route. Then the blazes had stopped, or she had stopped seeing them. She wasn't sure which, and the distinction had seemed important for a while, back when she still believed she could find her way back. She'd been so careful. She'd studied the map, noted the landmarks, checked her compass every half mile like the guidebook recommended. The trail was supposed to curve northeast after the second creek crossing, following the contour of a ridge before descending to Cruiser Lake. But there was no ridge. There was only forest, endless, identical forest that seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at it. The first night had been bad. She'd built a fire, or tried to. The wood was damp, and her matches were running low, and the flames never grew beyond a guttering orange glow that threw more shadows than light. She'd huddled against a fallen log, wrapped in her emergency blanket, listening to sounds she couldn't identify. Branches cracking in the distance. Something moving through the underbrush, circling. The soft crunch of footsteps on frozen ground that stopped whenever she held her breath to listen. By morning, she'd convinced herself it was deer. Maybe a wolf, though wolves rarely came this close to humans. The forest was full of animals. Animals made sounds. Sounds carried strangely in the cold. She was tired and tired, scared people heard things that weren't there. But then she'd found the tracks. They were pressed into a patch of soft mud near a half-frozen stream. Footprints, human footprints, bare human footprints. No boots, no shoes. Just the clear impression of naked feet, each print nearly a foot long, the toes splayed wide as if gripping the earth. They came from nowhere and went nowhere. They simply appeared at the stream's edge and vanished into the water. Brooke had stared at those prints for a long time. Her mind offered explanations, rejected them, offered new ones. Another hiker who'd lost their boots. Someone from a nearby cabin taking an ill-advised walk. A prank somehow, left here to disturb whoever found it. Each explanation felt thinner than the last. She'd started walking again, faster now, no longer looking for blazes but simply trying to put distance between herself and those prints. The forest seemed to thicken around her. Trees grew closer together. The sky, what she could see of it through the canopy, had gone the color of a bruise. And then she'd heard the voice. Brooke. Her own name, spoken clearly, from somewhere behind her and to the left. A woman's voice, familiar somehow, though she couldn't place it. She'd frozen, heart slamming against her ribs. Brooke, I found the trail. Come this way. It sounded like her sister. It sounded exactly like Megan, down to the slightly nasal quality she got when she was excited about something. But Megan was in Minneapolis, 200 miles south, and no one knew Brooke was out here except the ranger station, and the ranger station didn't know her sister's voice. Brooke didn't answer. She didn't move. She barely breathed. The voice came again, closer now, patient and warm. Brooke, honey, you're going the wrong way. Let me help you. Something in the rhythm was wrong. The pauses fell in strange places. The warmth felt performed, like an actor reading lines they didn't understand. Brooke ran. Nathan found the first sign of Brooke's passage 2 miles up the trail. A candy bar wrapper caught in the thorns of a blackberry bush, bright foil against the dull browns and grays of the forest. He bagged it as evidence and continued on, scanning the ground for tracks. The frozen mud held impressions poorly, but here and there he could make out the tread pattern of hiking boots, heading northeast, toward Cruiser Lake. The temperature continued to drop. By early afternoon, the first flakes of snow had begun to fall, fat and slow, the vanguard of the coming storm. Nathan increased his pace, aware that every hour diminished his chances of finding Brooke Ellison alive. Hypothermia could set in within hours in these conditions. If she was injured, immobile, unable to generate body heat through movement. He pushed the thought away. Focus on the task. Follow the trail. Trust the training. The radio crackled in his hand, startling him. Cabetogama, Rainy Lake, status update? Rainy Lake, I'm approximately 3 miles up the Cruiser Lake Trail. Found evidence of passage, candy wrapper, boot prints heading northeast. No visual on the subject yet. Snow's starting. Over. The response came garbled, words fragmenting into static. Copy. Weather. Advise. Turn if... Then silence. Nathan tried again. Rainy Lake, say again? You're breaking up. Nothing. Not even static now. Just a hollow emptiness where Jim's voice should have been. He checked the radio. Battery at 60%. Channel correct. Antenna undamaged. Everything working, and yet... Rainy Lake, Kabetogama, do you copy? The silence seemed to deepen. Nathan became aware of how quiet the forest had grown. No wind, no birdsong, no small rustlings of squirrels or mice. Even the falling snow seemed muted, each flake landing without sound. He stood still for a long moment, listening. His breath hung in the air like smoke. The trees pressed close on either side of the trail, their trunks gray and black and bone-white, their branches interlacing overhead in a canopy that blocked what little light remained. He'd walked this trail before, many times, but something about it felt wrong now. Changed. The distances between landmarks seemed altered. A boulder he remembered being on his left was now on his right. A creek he should have crossed half a mile back still hadn't appeared. Nathan checked his compass. Northeast. Correct heading. The needle pointed true. But true to what? He started walking again, faster now. Brooke had stopped running when her lungs gave out, when her legs buckled, when she couldn't draw enough air to fuel another step. She'd collapsed against a tree, an enormous white pine, its bark rough and reassuring against her back, and tried to think. The voice hadn't followed. Or if it had, it was being quiet about it. She could hear nothing now except her own ragged breathing and the whisper of snow falling through branches. The forest had gone still in a way that felt intentional, watchful, like a held breath before a scream. She was lost. Really, truly lost. Not temporarily turned around, not momentarily confused, but lost in the deep and permanent way that people got lost when they wandered into places that didn't want them found. The map was useless. The compass, she'd checked it a dozen times, and each time it pointed in a different direction, the needle swinging lazily as if the concept of north had become negotiable. Her phone had died yesterday, not from lack of battery but from something else, the screen flickering with symbols she didn't recognize before going dark. She was going to die out here. The thought arrived with a strange calm, not acceptance exactly, but acknowledgement. The forest was too big. The cold was too deep. She had no food, no real shelter, no way to call for help. Even if someone came looking, and someone would eventually, they wouldn't find her in time. The snow was already covering her tracks. By morning, there would be no sign she'd ever existed at all. Unless... The voice had said it found the trail. The voice had offered to help. Brooke knew in some deep and instinctive part of herself that following the voice would be a terrible mistake. Everything her body told her, the hair standing up on her arms, the knot of dread in her stomach, the way her hands shook with something beyond cold, screamed that the voice was wrong. That whatever spoke with Megan's tongue was not Megan, was not even human, was something old and hungry that had learned to mimic what it killed. But what choice did she have? Freeze here, alone, waiting for a rescue that wouldn't come? Or take a chance, any chance, on survival? She pushed herself upright. Her legs trembled but held. The snow was falling harder now, accumulating on branches, on rocks, on the frozen ground. In an hour, maybe less, it would be too deep to walk through. She had to move. She had to choose. "Hello?" she called, her voice cracking. Is someone there?" The forest held its silence for a long moment. Then, from somewhere ahead, not behind, she was sure it had been behind before, the voice answered. "I'm here, Brooke. I've been waiting for you." It didn't sound like Megan anymore. It didn't sound like anyone. The words were right, but the voice beneath them was hollow, resonant, like something speaking from the bottom of a well, or from inside a chest cavity, or from nowhere at all. Brooke took a step forward, then another. The snow crunched under her boots, obscenely loud. The trees seemed to lean in, curious, eager. She walked toward the voice. Nathan found her jacket at dusk. It was draped over a low branch as if placed there deliberately. A bright red North Face shell, impossible to miss against the white and gray of the forest. He approached it slowly, scanning the surrounding trees, the ground, the shadows that pooled between the trunks. The snow had accumulated to nearly 4 inches now, and in the fading light, the world had gone monochrome, all contrast bled away. "Brooke Ellison?" he called. His voice fell flat, absorbed by the snow. "This is Park Ranger Nathan Hayes. If you can hear me, call out or make a sound." Nothing. Not even an echo. He unclipped his flashlight and played the beam across the snow. There, boot prints, half filled but still visible, leading away from the jacket and into the deeper forest. And beside them, overlapping them in places, another set of prints. Barefoot. Impossibly long. Toes spread wide, as if whatever made them was gripping the earth with each step. Nathan had grown up in northern Minnesota. He'd heard the stories that everyone heard, passed down from grandparents who'd heard them from their grandparents, who'd learned them from the Ojibwe who'd lived here since time out of memory. Stories of the Wendigo, the hunger spirit, the thing that came in winter when the world was starving. It had been human once, the story said. It had done something unforgivable to survive, and the doing had changed it. Now it hungered forever, hollow and cold. And the more it ate, the hungrier it became. Nathan had never believed the stories. They were campfire tales, meant to scare children and entertain tourists. The forest held real dangers: hypothermia, dehydration, injury, predators, and those were frightening enough without inventing monsters. But standing there in the failing light, looking at those prints, Nathan felt something he hadn't felt since childhood, something that bypassed his training, his experience, his rational mind. Something old and instinctive and absolutely certain. He was not alone. "Brooke?" he called again, quieter now. From somewhere deeper in the forest, barely audible over the whisper of falling snow, a voice answered. His voice, his exact voice, with his exact inflection, speaking words he hadn't said. "This is Park Ranger Nathan Hayes. If you can hear me, call out." Nathan's blood went cold. He stood frozen, flashlight beam trembling as the echo of his own voice faded into silence. Then another voice came, different this time, younger, female, desperate. "Help me. Please, I'm over here. I can't feel my legs anymore. Please." Brooke. It had to be Brooke. But Nathan didn't move. Couldn't move. Because the voice had come from his left, and the boot prints led to his right, and something in the rhythm of her words was wrong. The fear sounded performed. The desperation felt like a mask over something else, something patient and amused. "Please," the voice begged, closer now. "I'm so cold. I've been waiting so long." Nathan turned off his flashlight. In the sudden dark, the forest seemed to breathe around him, in, out, and out. A vast living presence that he'd somehow never noticed in 4 years of walking these trails. The snow continued to fall, silent and relentless. Somewhere in the blackness, something moved. He didn't run. Running was wrong. Running was what it wanted. Running meant movement, meant heat, meant the sound of his heart pounding loud enough to follow. Instead, he walked, slow and deliberate, back the way he'd come. Each step was an act of will. Each breath was controlled, measured, silent as he could make it. Behind him, the voice changed again. Became something else. Became a sound that wasn't a voice at all. A low, rattling exhalation, a creak of ice and sinew, a hunger given form and breath. Nathan walked faster. The trees pressed close. The trail had changed again. Narrower now, choked with undergrowth that hadn't been there before, leading him into unfamiliar territory. His compass needle spun aimlessly. His radio produced only silence. The flashlight, when he risked turning it on, illuminated nothing but falling snow and endless gray trunks. He was lost. The realization hit him like a physical blow. 4 years in this park, hundreds of miles of trails walked and memorized, and now he was lost in a forest that no longer followed the rules of the world he knew. The map in his head was useless. The land had changed, or he had been moved, or something had folded the forest in on itself like a fist closing. The rattling sound came again, closer. Nathan could smell something now, a sweetness beneath the cold, the smell of meat gone wrong, of something rotting from the inside out. He thought of Brooke Ellison, of her jacket hanging on that branch, of her boot prints walking beside those impossible barefoot tracks, walking toward something, walking willingly, because it had sounded like someone she trusted, because the cold made you desperate, because sometimes the only choice was between certain death and probable death, and humans always chose probable, even when probable was a trap. The smell grew stronger. The rattling became a rhythm, almost like breathing, almost like speech. Nathan's flashlight flickered once, twice, and he caught a glimpse of something between the trees. Tall, so tall, white and gray and wrong in every proportion, with arms too long and eyes that reflected his light like mirrors. Then the flashlight died. Nathan ran. They found him 3 days later, 2 miles from the Ash River trailhead, curled in a hollow beneath a fallen log. He was alive, barely, hypothermic, dehydrated, unresponsive. His radio was missing. His flashlight was crushed, as if something had stepped on it. He couldn't explain how he'd gotten where he was, or what had happened to the intervening days, or why he kept repeating the same phrase over and over as the medics loaded him onto the stretcher. It remembers. It remembers everything. Brooke Ellison's body was never found. The official report listed her as a missing person, presumed dead from exposure. Her car was towed from the Ash River lot. Her sister flew in from Minneapolis to collect her belongings. The sketchbook, the water bottle, the fleece jacket from the back seat, the note on the dashboard. Nathan transferred to a park in Arizona the following spring. Desert country, open sky, no trees. He still wakes sometimes in the night, certain he's heard something moving in the darkness outside his window. He still freezes when he hears his own voice coming from a room where no one should be. He still dreams of the forest, of the snow, of boot prints walking beside something barefoot and wrong. And sometimes, in the dreams, he sees Brooke Ellison. She's standing at the edge of a clearing, looking back at him. She's not alone. There's something beside her, something tall and pale and patient. Something that wears her face now, the way it once wore others. It smiles at him with her mouth. It remembers. The morning fog hung low over the Cascade River Valley, pooling between the old-growth cedars like something poured and settling. Wesley Holt stood on the wooden porch of the Marble Mount Ranger Station, cradling his second cup of coffee between both palms and watching the mist thin as the sun tried, without much conviction, to burn through the October overcast. The air carried that particular smell of Pacific Northwest autumn he had come to know intimately over 6 years of service. Damp earth, decomposing alder leaves, the faint mineral tang of glacial runoff from the peak still hidden above the cloud line. Somewhere in the forest to the east, a varied thrush called its single descending note, the sound lonely and perfect in the stillness. He checked his watch. 6:42. The station's weather radio had promised overcast skies transitioning to rain by late afternoon, temperatures dropping into the low 40s after sunset. Standard October conditions for the North Cascades, nothing that would close trails or require special advisories. Wesley finished his coffee, rinsed the mug in the station's small kitchen, and began his morning equipment check with the unhurried thoroughness of long habit. Flashlight batteries, fresh. First aid kit, stocked. GPS unit, charged and calibrated. Radio, channel confirmed, battery at full. He pulled on his NPS jacket, adjusted his duty belt, and keyed the radio for his morning check-in. Dispatch, this is Unit 12, Beginning morning patrol of Thunder Creek Corridor. How copy? The response came clear, touched only by the slight static that was normal for this valley. Copy Unit 12. Be advised, we have one vehicle in the Colonial Creek lot registered overnight. Single occupant, female, trail permit for 4th of July pass. Expected return yesterday evening. No contact yet. Wesley acknowledged and noted the information. Overdue hikers weren't uncommon this time of year. People underestimated how quickly October daylight failed in the mountains, or they pushed too far and decided to camp, rather than hike out in darkness. Usually they showed up sheepish and tired at the trailhead by mid-morning. He'd give it until 10, then consider a welfare check if the vehicle was still there. The drive from Marble Mount to the Colonial Creek trailhead took 20 minutes on the winding mountain highway. Wesley passed the dark waters of Diablo Lake, its surface mirror still beneath the overcast, reflecting the steep forested slopes in shades of gray and green so deep they approached black. No other vehicles on the road this early, this late in the season. The summer crowds had retreated weeks ago, leaving the park to the maintenance crews, the wildlife preparing for winter, and the rangers who preferred the solitude of the off-season. He spotted the vehicle as soon as he pulled into the Colonial Creek lot. A silver Honda Civic, Washington plates parked in the far corner near the trailhead kiosk. A fine layer of moisture beaded on the windshield and hood, suggesting it had sat overnight through the fog. Wesley pulled alongside and stepped out, his boots crunching on the gravel as he approached. Through the passenger window, he could see a day pack in the back seat, a reusable water bottle in the cup holder, and on the dashboard, a handwritten note. Back by 6 p.m. Tuesday. Left early. Save me some dinner? B Tuesday. Yesterday. He checked the trail register at the kiosk and found the entry. Brooke Ellison, solo, destination 4th of July pass, departed 7:15 a.m. October 22nd. Her handwriting was neat, slightly hurried. Below her intended route, she'd written so excited with a small drawn heart. Wesley keyed his radio. Dispatch Unit 12. I'm at Colonial Creek. That overdue vehicle, confirming occupant is Brooke Ellison, solo hiker. Departed yesterday morning for 4th of July pass. Vehicle appears untouched overnight. I'm going to head up the trail, see if I can make contact. Copy Unit 12. Keep us posted. Weather's coming in faster than forecasted. Expecting rain by 1400 now. He shouldered his pack and started up the Thunder Creek Trail, the maintained path that would eventually branch toward the high pass, where Brooke Ellison had intended to go. The forest closed around him immediately, towering western red cedars and Douglas firs creating a cathedral ceiling of interlocking branches that filtered the gray morning light into something green and dim. His footsteps fell soft on the packed earth, and he listened to the sounds he knew by heart. The distant rush of Thunder Creek below the trail, the tap of moisture dripping from high branches, the occasional rustle of a squirrel in the undergrowth. All normal, all as it should be. It was perhaps a mile in when Wesley first noticed the quiet. Not silence, the creek still murmured somewhere below, the water still dripped, but an absence of animal sound that seemed to have crept up on him without announcement. No thrushes calling, no squirrels chattering. Even the ravens that normally patrolled these woods had gone elsewhere. He stopped walking and stood still for a long moment, scanning the trees, listening. The forest breathed around him, ancient and patient, but something in its rhythm had shifted in a way he couldn't quite name. Probably a predator nearby, a cougar maybe passing through. That would explain the animals going quiet. He continued on, but found himself walking more carefully now, placing his feet with deliberate attention. 26 hours earlier, Brooke Ellison had stood in this same spot, but the forest had still been singing. She'd been hiking since just after dawn, her legs warm with exertion, her spirits high despite the solitude. The 4th of July Pass Trail was a bucket list item she'd been planning for months, a challenging 9-mile route through some of the most pristine wilderness in the lower 48. The October timing wasn't ideal, she knew. The days were short, the weather unpredictable, but she'd checked the forecasts obsessively, planned her turnaround time with mathematical precision, and packed enough layers to handle anything short of a blizzard. She was careful. She was prepared, The trail map showed a clear path. Follow Thunder Creek for 3 miles, then branch north on the Panther Creek connector, ascending through switchbacks to the pass. Simple navigation, well-marked junctions. She'd downloaded the route to her GPS as backup, though she prided herself on her map and compass skills. Everything about this day was perfect. The autumn colors burning through the evergreen monotony, the crisp air filling her lungs, the profound silence of being truly, beautifully alone. It was around mile 4 when Brooke encountered the first wrong thing. The junction marker for Panther Creek should have appeared after a distinctive boulder formation. She'd read about it in 3 separate trail reports, but she'd been walking for what felt like too long without seeing any boulder formation, distinctive or otherwise. She stopped, consulted her paper map, checked her GPS. According to both, she was on track, approaching the junction within the next quarter mile. She continued watching for the signpost. A quarter mile passed, then half a mile. The trail continued unchanged, the trees pressing close, the path curving gently through the old growth. No junction, no marker, no boulder formation, just endless forest. The same forest, as if she were walking through a pattern that repeated itself. Brooke felt the first flutter of unease in her chest. Not fear, not yet, just confusion edged with frustration. She checked her GPS again. It showed her position as stable, right where the junction should be. But there was no junction. She was standing in the middle of unbroken trail, and her technology insisted she was somewhere she clearly wasn't. She turned around. She would backtrack to the last landmark she was certain of and try again. The trail behind her stretched straight and empty, dappled with gray morning light. She started walking back the way she'd come. After 10 minutes, she should have reached a footbridge over a seasonal stream. She remembered crossing it clearly. The boards gray and weathered, a single orange ribbon tied to the railing by some previous hiker. The footbridge wasn't there. The stream wasn't there. Just trail and forest and silence. Brooke stopped walking. Her breath had quickened without her noticing, her heart beating harder than the mild exertion warranted. She was not lost. She couldn't be lost. She'd followed a marked trail, maintained and mapped in a national park visited by thousands every year. People didn't get lost on trails like this. Not really lost. She looked around her. Really looked, trying to find something, anything, she recognized. The trees stood impossibly tall, their trunks vanishing into the fog that had somehow descended without her noticing. The trail continued in both directions, identical, as if the forest had folded in on itself and she was standing in the crease. From somewhere to her left, deeper in the woods, she heard a sound, high and thin, almost like a whistle, almost like someone calling. Wesley reached the 4th of July junction at 9:30. The trail marker stood exactly where it should, a weathered wooden post with a carved arrow pointing north toward the pass. He checked the ground for recent tracks and found them. Boot prints in the soft earth, the tread pattern consistent with a light hiking shoe, heading north. Brooke had made it this far. He tried his radio. Dispatch, Unit 12. I'm at the 4th of July junction. Signs of recent foot traffic heading toward the pass. Going to continue north and see if I can locate the missing hiker. Static answered him. He tried again, adjusting his position, raising the antenna. The static resolved into something that might have been words, might have been nothing. A fragment of sound that could have been copy, or could have been noise. The mountains did this sometimes, created dead zones where the terrain blocked transmission. He was probably fine. He'd try again from higher elevation. The trail climbed steeply once past the junction, switchbacking through dense timber that gradually thinned as the elevation increased. Wesley moved at a steady pace, stopping periodically to call out, "Brooke? Brooke Ellison? National Park Service, can you hear me?" His voice vanished into the trees, swallowed by the fog that was growing thicker now, descending from the peaks above like something with weight and intention. By noon, he had climbed above the worst of the tree cover, emerging onto a rocky ridge where the trail threaded between outcrops of gray granite. Visibility had dropped to perhaps 50 yards, the fog erasing the mountains that should have been visible on all sides. The temperature had fallen noticeably, and Wesley pulled his jacket tighter, feeling the cold seep through the fabric. He tried his radio again. Dispatch Unit 12, I'm approaching 4th of July Pass. No sign of the missing hiker yet. Weather conditions deteriorating. Please advise. This time the static formed something almost like a voice. Not dispatch's voice, something else. A whisper that rose and fell in a cadence that seemed deliberate, seemed shaped, but carried no words he could understand. Wesley held the radio away from his ear and stared at it. Interference. Had to be interference. Some bizarre atmospheric effect he'd never encountered before. He switched channels, tried again. The whisper followed him. The same toneless murmur, as if something were breathing into a microphone just out of range. He clipped the radio back to his belt and continued climbing. The pass, when he reached it, was invisible, just a saddle of rock emerging from and vanishing into the white nothing of the fog. Wesley stood at what should have been a viewpoint overlooking the Skagit Valley and saw only gray in all directions, a world reduced to the 20 feet of ground immediately around him. And in that gray, that featureless void, something moved. Not close, not far. Somewhere at the edge of visibility, a shape passed through the fog, tall, thin, wrong in its proportions. There and gone so quickly he couldn't be certain he'd seen anything at all. Wesley's hand moved to his radio instinctively, but he didn't key it. He stood frozen, listening. The silence was total. Not even wind. Not even his own breathing, which he realized he was holding. Then, from the fog behind him, the direction he'd come from, a whistle. High and thin, 3 rising notes. And after a pause, an answer from somewhere ahead. The same 3 notes, identical in pitch and duration, as if the sound were being passed between 2 points with him in the middle. Wesley had been a ranger for 6 years. He'd encountered bears, cougars, disoriented hikers, and once a man having a complete psychological break at 7,000 feet. He knew fear, had learned to work through it with the calm professionalism his job required. But this fear was different. This was old fear, the kind that predated profession and training, the kind that lived in the base of the spine and screamed run without offering a direction. He did not run. He drew his flashlight, though it was midday, and began walking back down the trail. Brooke had heard the whistles too. That was hours ago now, or what felt like hours. Time had become strange in the fog, stretching and compressing in ways that made her head hurt when she tried to calculate. Her phone had died despite showing a full charge that morning. Her GPS showed her position as a single blinking dot in the middle of a blank screen, all map data somehow erased. She had stopped trying to find the trail. There was no trail anymore. There were only trees, the same trees, arranged in patterns that repeated and shifted when she wasn't looking directly at them. She would walk toward a distinctive fallen log and find herself approaching it from the opposite direction. She would mark a tree with a scratch from her trekking pole and discover the mark on a different tree entirely, as if the forest were reshuffling itself around her. The whistles had been her first sign that she wasn't alone. They came from different directions, sometimes ahead, sometimes behind, sometimes from above in a way that made no sense. At first she'd called back, desperate for human contact, her voice cracking as she shouted hello, help, please. But the whistles never responded to her words. They only called to each other, triangulating, coordinating, and she began to understand with a horror that felt like ice water in her veins that she was being herded. She was crying now, had been crying for some time, the tears cold on her cheeks. The temperature had dropped steadily, her breath forming clouds that joined the fog and became part of it. Her legs ached from walking, from endless walking through a forest that had no end and no exit. And then she saw it. Not clearly, nothing was clear anymore, but enough. A figure standing between 2 trees at the edge of visibility. Tall. Too tall, stretched in ways that hurt to look at, as if someone had taken a human form and pulled it like taffy. It wasn't moving. It was just standing there, watching her with eyes she couldn't see but could feel, a weight of attention that pressed against her like something physical. Brooke tried to scream. What came out was a sob, a broken sound that the fog swallowed instantly. The figure tilted its head, a gesture almost curious, almost gentle, and then it was gone, simply not there anymore, and in its place was a path she hadn't seen before. A clear path, winding through the trees, leading somewhere. She knew she shouldn't follow it. She knew with absolute certainty that the path was a throat and she was being invited to be swallowed. But her legs were moving anyway, carrying her forward, because there was nowhere else to go, and she was so tired and so cold, and the path was the only thing in this impossible forest that looked like it led anywhere at all. The last thing Brooke Ellison thought as she walked into the trees that closed behind her like a door was that the forest had been waiting for her, that it had always been waiting, that she had been walking toward this moment since the day she was born. Wesley found her pack at the base of a cedar tree just below the pass. It sat upright, carefully placed, as if she'd set it down intending to return. Inside, water bottles still full, protein bars untouched, a paperback novel with a bookmark 3/4 through. Her emergency whistle hung from a clip on the shoulder strap. Her jacket was rolled and secured beneath the top flap. Everything a prepared hiker would carry. Nothing to explain why she would leave it behind. He searched the surrounding area for an hour, calling her name until his voice went hoarse. The fog never lifted. The whistles never returned after that first exchange. The forest sat around him, ancient and silent, keeping whatever secrets it held. At 1400, with the promised rain beginning to fall in cold sheets, Wesley made the decision to descend. He photographed the pack's location, GPS tagged the coordinates, and began the long hike back to the trailhead. The forest let him go without incident. The trail appeared exactly where it should, every junction and footbridge in its proper place. By the time he reached the parking lot, soaked through and shaking with a cold that wasn't entirely from the rain, his radio had cleared. Dispatch Unit 12, I'm back at Colonial Creek. I found personal effects but no sign of the missing hiker. We need to initiate a full SAR operation. The search lasted 4 days. 32 volunteers, 4 dog teams, 2 helicopter sweeps when the weather briefly cleared. They found nothing, not a footprint, not a scrap of clothing, not a single trace of Brooke Ellison beyond the pack that Wesley had already recovered. The official report classified her disappearance as undetermined circumstances, a bureaucratic phrase that meant nothing and covered everything. Wesley returned to duty the following week. He requested a transfer to a park without old-growth forest, somewhere open, somewhere he could see the horizon. The request was denied. Budget constraints. He would remain at North Cascades through the winter. Skeleton crew. Long nights in the station listening to the wind. Sometimes, in those long nights, he heard the whistles, high and thin, 3 rising notes drifting down from the mountains to the east. He never mentioned it in his reports. He never spoke of it to his colleagues. Some knowledge was too heavy to share, and some fear was too old to name. Brooke Ellison's case remains open. Her family still maintains a website, still offers a reward for information. The silver Honda Civic was eventually towed and returned to her parents in Bellingham. Among her possessions was the paperback novel, bookmark still in place. She never finished it. She never finished anything. In the North Cascades, the old-growth forest stands eternal and patient, keeping its own counsel. The trails wind through the timber exactly as they're mapped, except when they don't. And sometimes, when the fog descends and the world grows quiet, you can hear them calling to each other, high and thin, 3 rising notes, the sound passing from ridge to ridge like a message in a language older than words. Wesley Holt still patrols those woods. He still does his job with professional competence. But he no longer walks the Thunder Creek corridor alone. And he never, ever answers when something calls his name from the trees. Location: Voyageurs National Park, Minnesota. Date: October 27, 2019. The coffee had gone cold in Derek's thermos by the time he noticed. He had been sitting at the wooden desk inside the Kabetogama Lake Visitor Center for nearly an hour, watching the morning fog lift off the water through the wide windows, his mind wandering somewhere between the maintenance reports he was supposed to file and the strange quiet that had settled over the park in recent days. October in Voyageurs was always a transitional time. The summer crowds long gone, the winter ice fishermen not yet arrived. But this year felt different, emptier, the kind of empty that seemed to have weight. He poured the cold coffee into the sink and started a fresh pot, the familiar gurgle of the machine filling the silence. Outside, the birch trees had surrendered most of their leaves, their white trunks standing like bones against the gray sky. The forecast called for rain by afternoon, temperatures dropping into the low 30s by nightfall. Derek checked the station's weather radio out of habit, heard the automated voice confirm what he already knew, and began his morning equipment check. Flashlight batteries, full. First aid kit, stocked. GPS unit, functioning. Radio, clear signal to dispatch. These rituals had become as automatic as breathing after 7 years with the National Park Service, 4 of them here at Voyageurs. The park sprawled across more than 200,000 acres of interconnected waterways, boreal forest, and exposed Canadian shield bedrock, a landscape carved by glaciers and older than human memory. Derek knew its contours intimately, the way Rainy Lake could turn treacherous within minutes when storms rolled in from the northwest, the hidden portage trails that connected the interior lakes, the islands where moose sometimes swam between in the early morning hours. He had learned to read the forest the way some people read newspapers, noting which birds were present and which were absent, tracking the seasonal movements of wolves and black bears, understanding that every sound and every silence carried meaning. This morning the ravens were quiet. That was the first thing he noticed when he stepped outside for his patrol. Usually they announced themselves from the moment dawn cracked the horizon, their harsh calls echoing across the water. Today nothing, just the soft lap of waves against the dock and the distant groan of wind through the conifers. Derek's radio crackled. "Kabetagama Station, this is dispatch. You copy?" He keyed the mic. "Dispatch, Kabetagama Station. I copy. Go ahead." "We've got a vehicle registration check request. Silver Honda CRV, Minnesota plates. Parked at the Ash River trailhead since yesterday evening. Owner registered for a day hike on the Blind Ash Bay Trail. Name's Hannah Lindgren, female, 26 years old. She was due back by 1800 hours yesterday. No contact since." Derek felt the familiar weight settle into his chest, the one that came with every overdue hiker report. Most of the time it was nothing. A twisted ankle, a wrong turn, someone who underestimated distances or overestimated daylight. But occasionally, it was something else. "Copy that, dispatch. I'll head out to Ash River and begin a preliminary search. Request you notify search and rescue coordinator, have a team on standby." "Understood, keep us posted, dispatch out." He gathered his pack, double-checked his supplies, and climbed into the service truck. The drive to Ash River took 20 minutes on roads that wound through forest so dense it seemed to press against the windows. The sky had darkened since morning, clouds piling against each other like bruises. The first drops of rain began to fall as he pulled into the trailhead parking lot. The silver Honda was exactly where dispatch had described, parked at the far end of the lot, alone. Derek approached it slowly, noting the condensation on the inside of the windows, the way leaves had accumulated on the windshield overnight. On the passenger seat he could see a day pack, purple, the kind sold at outdoor retailers, along with a water bottle and what looked like a paperback book. A handwritten note was tucked under the driver's side visor. "Back by 5, left the granola bars for you. H." Someone had been expecting her. Someone was probably worried sick by now. He photographed the vehicle and the note, logged the details in his incident report, and turned toward the trailhead. The Blind Ash Bay Trail was a moderate 4-mile loop that skirted the edge of the bay before climbing through mixed forest to an overlook. Well-marked, well-maintained, the kind of trail that rarely caused problems. Derek had walked it dozens of times. The rain intensified as he entered the forest, fat drops drumming against the canopy above. The temperature had dropped noticeably since morning. He could see his breath now, small clouds that dissipated into the gray air. The trail was slick with wet leaves, and he moved carefully, scanning the underbrush on either side for any sign of disturbance. "Hannah!" he called out, his voice absorbed by the trees. "Park Service, can you hear me?" No response. Only the rain, and beneath it, that strange weighted silence. 12 hours earlier, Hannah Lindgren had started down this same trail with nothing but optimism and a desire to clear her head. The breakup had been 3 weeks ago, and she was tired of her apartment, tired of Minneapolis, tired of well-meaning friends who kept asking if she was okay. She needed trees. She needed water. She needed to remember that the world was bigger than her small, broken heart. The forest had welcomed her with the particular beauty of late autumn, golden light filtering through the remaining leaves, the earthy smell of decay and renewal, the soft crunch of the trail beneath her hiking boots. She had started late, around 2 in the afternoon, knowing she had plenty of time for the 4-mile loop. The weather had been perfect. Cool, but not cold. Overcast, but not threatening. She had felt for the first time in weeks something like peace. The first sign that something was wrong came about an hour into her hike, just past the halfway point where the trail curved away from the bay and climbed into denser forest. She had stopped to drink some water and check her phone. No signal as expected, when she noticed the silence. Not the peaceful silence of nature at rest, but something else. Something that felt like a held breath. Hannah stood very still, listening. No birds. No squirrels rustling through the leaves. No wind, despite the way the branches had been swaying moments before. The forest had simply stopped. "Hello?" she called, feeling foolish even as she said it. Nothing. She continued walking, faster now, eager to reach the overlook and begin the descent back to her car. The trail markers were still visible, white blazes painted on tree trunks every 50 yards or so. She counted them as she walked. 1, 2, 3, 4. The 5th one was wrong. Hannah stopped, staring at the white blaze on the birch tree in front of her. It was fresh. The paint looked wet, as if it had been applied minutes ago. And below it, scratched into the bark with something sharp, were 4 words. Hannah. Stay. With me. Her name. Her name. Carved into a tree in the middle of a forest where no one knew she was hiking. Where she hadn't told anyone her plans except the registration form at the trailhead. She ran, the trail blurred beneath her feet, branches whipping at her face and arms, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She didn't look back. She couldn't look back. The overlook appeared ahead. She could see the break in the trees, the gray sky beyond, and she pushed toward it with everything she had. And then she heard it. Her mother's voice. Her mother, who had been dead for 6 years, calling her name from somewhere behind her in the forest. Hannah, sweetheart. Why are you running? Come back. Come back to me. Hannah stopped. Every rational part of her brain screamed to keep moving, to get to the overlook, to follow the trail back down to her car and drive away and never return. But the voice was so perfect, so exactly right. The way her mother had always said her name, with that slight emphasis on the second syllable, the warmth in her tone, the love. Mom? The word escaped before she could stop it. I've missed you so much, honey. I've been waiting. I've been so hungry waiting for you. The last sentence was wrong. The tone had shifted just slightly, something cold creeping into the edges of that beloved voice. Hannah felt tears streaming down her face, felt her body trembling with something beyond fear. You're not her, she whispered. The forest laughed. It was not a human sound. Derek found the first sign of Hannah's passage near the mile marker, a purple hair tie snagged on a branch, the kind that matched the color of the pack in her car. He bagged it as evidence and continued, the rain now falling in sheets that reduced visibility to 30 feet in any direction. Dispatch, this is Kabetogama Station. He had to shout to be heard over the downpour. I've found personal effects on the Blind Ash Bay Trail, approximately 1 mile in. Continuing search. Conditions deteriorating. Request search and rescue team deployment. The response came through broken with static. Cabe, station, copy, team en route, ETA, 90 minutes. 90 minutes. In this weather, it might as well be 90 years. Derek pressed on. The trail climbed steadily, and with each step, the silence beneath the rain seemed to deepen. Even the sound of water striking leaves began to feel muffled, as if the forest itself were absorbing noise. He called Hannah's name every few minutes, his voice growing hoarse, his hope dimming. At the overlook clearing, he found her jacket. It was draped over a rock at the edge of the viewpoint, neatly folded, as if she had set it down deliberately. Derek approached slowly, his hand moving to the bear spray on his belt. A reflex, though he knew no bear had done this. The jacket was a North Face shell, bright red, expensive. Inside the pocket, he found her phone, dead, and a granola bar wrapper. Beyond the overlook, the trail descended back toward the trailhead. But there was another path too. An old portage route, unmarked and unofficial, that led deeper into the interior. Few people knew it existed. Derek only knew because he had worked this park for 4 years, had studied the historical maps, had walked every forgotten trail during slow winter weeks. Fresh footprints led down that unmarked path. 2 sets, one the size of Hannah's hiking boots, the other, larger, much larger, and wrong somehow. The gait too long, the impression too deep, as if whatever made them carried impossible weight. Derek keyed his radio. "Dispatch, I've found the subject's jacket at the Blind Ash Bay overlook. Signs indicate she left the marked trail and proceeded into the interior via the old Moose Bay portage. I'm pursuing. Please advise SR team of updated location." Static. Then, from the speaker, a voice he recognized, his own voice. "Dispatch, this is Kabetogama Station. I've found her. She's safe. Call off the search." Derek stared at the radio in his hand. He had not spoken. His thumb was nowhere near the transmit button. "Derek." The voice from the radio shifted, became something else. Feminine, young, terrified. "Derek, please, I'm so cold, I'm so hungry, I can hear it coming. Please find me, please." Then nothing. Dead air. He should have turned back. Every protocol, every training scenario, every survival instinct screamed at him to return to the trailhead. Wait for backup. Let the search and rescue team handle whatever was happening in these woods. That was the smart play. That was what kept rangers alive. But Hannah Lindgren was 26 years old and had left a note for someone who loved her, promising to be back by 5, and she was somewhere in this forest, and Derek could not make himself turn around. He followed the footprints into the unmarked dark. The portage trail descended into a valley where the trees grew older and closer together, their branches interlocking overhead to form a canopy so dense that even the rain barely penetrated. The light that filtered through was gray-green submarine, the kind of light that made distances impossible to judge. Derek moved slowly, one hand on his radio, the other on his flashlight, though he didn't turn it on yet. Battery conservation, old habit. The smell hit him first. Something sweet and rotten like fruit left too long in the sun, mixed with something else. Copper, maybe, or old meat. His stomach turned. He had smelled death before, had found hikers who didn't make it, hunters who fell from tree stands, a fisherman who drowned in Kabetogama Lake 3 summers ago. This was different. This was wrong in a way that bypassed his rational mind and spoke directly to something older, something that remembered when humans were prey. The footprints ended at the edge of a clearing. Hannah Lindgren stood in the center of it, her back to him, perfectly still. She was soaked from the rain, her dark hair plastered to her skull, her arms hanging loose at her sides. She was not shivering despite the cold. "Hannah?" Derek's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Hannah, I'm with the Park Service. I'm here to help you." She didn't move. "Hannah, can you hear me? Are you hurt?" Slowly, very slowly, her head began to turn. Not her body, just her head, rotating on her neck with a smooth, mechanical motion that no human spine should allow. Derek saw her profile first. Pale skin, dark eye, lips slightly parted. Then she faced him fully, and he saw. Her eyes were wrong. Not the color. He couldn't tell the color in this light. But the way they tracked him with a predator's focus, unblinking, hungry. Her mouth stretched into a smile that was too wide, the corners extending past where they should stop, revealing teeth that seemed sharper and more numerous than any mouth should hold. Derek. The voice that came from that mouth was Hannah's and not Hannah's, layered with something else, something that resonated in frequencies the human ear was never meant to process. "I've been waiting for you. I called and called. And you came. You always come." Behind her, in the shadows at the far edge of the clearing, something massive shifted. Derek's flashlight hand moved without his permission, the beam cutting through the gloom. He saw it for only a second. Antlers like dead branches, rising from a skull that was too narrow, too long. A body that might once have been human, stretched and twisted into something gaunt and towering. Arms that ended in fingers like broken twigs. And the smell, God, the smell, pouring off it in waves. The thing wearing Hannah's face laughed. She was so easy, it said. So lonely, so hungry for something to fill the emptiness inside her. I offered to fill it. I always fill the emptiness, Derek. I filled it with me. Derek ran. He crashed through the underbrush, abandoning the trail, driven by pure animal terror. Branches tore at his face and hands. Roots caught at his feet. The rain blinded him. The forest swallowed his screams, and behind him, always behind him, never quite catching up, never quite falling back, he heard the sound of something laughing in his mother's voice, his father's voice, Hannah's voice, his own voice, all of them twisting together into a chorus that promised he would never have to feel empty again. He burst out of the tree line at the edge of Moose Bay, just as the first search and rescue truck pulled into the auxiliary access road. Lights, voices, people. The sounds from the forest stopped. They searched for 3 days. Helicopters, ground teams, dogs. They found Hannah Lindgren's boots arranged neatly beside the portage trail, soles facing up. They found her phone, her jacket, her hair tie. They found footprints that led into the interior and simply stopped, as if she had been lifted straight up into the air. They never found Hannah. The official report lists her as missing, presumed deceased, cause undetermined. Derek gave his statement, the factual parts anyway. He told them about the jacket, the footprints, the difficult terrain. He did not tell them about the voice on the radio. He did not tell them about the clearing, or the thing he saw in it, or the way Hannah's face had smiled at him with too many teeth. Some nights, Derek still hears her. Usually around 3 a.m., when the darkness is thickest, and the space between sleeping and waking becomes permeable, he hears her voice calling his name from somewhere just outside his window. His apartment in Duluth, 60 miles from Voyageurs, though he knows distance means nothing to something like that. He hears his mother's voice sometimes too, and his father's, and voices he doesn't recognize at all of them asking him why he ran, why he left her, why he didn't stay. The thing about hunger, he has come to understand, is that it never really ends. You can run from it, you can hide from it, you can build walls and light fires and surround yourself with noise and people and daylight. But somewhere, in some forgotten corner of the woods where the maps don't reach and the trails don't go, something is always waiting. Something is always hungry, and it knows your name.